This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through the business news stories you need to know about from the continent and beyond. But first, a quick run through the markets. Nigeria's all shares had a pretty decent run so far in the second half of the year, going up by nearly 8% over that period. Now compare that to the 1.1% decline in the JSE Stock 40, the 4.2% rise in the EGX 30, or the near 3% rise in Kenya's NSE 20 over the same period. Now, speaking of region East Africa, the Kenyan bourse had actually hit its 2021 peak in early September, but it's been downhill pretty much ever since. The NSE 20 has shed over 80 points, down by about 4% from the 9th of September to date. It still is positive on a year-to-date basis, but the question is for how much longer. The largest listed firm there, Safaricom, has mostly still held on to the gains made earlier in the year. On a year-to-date basis, it's up 22%. Here's what's coming up tonight. The International Court of Justice rules in Somalia's favour in a maritime border row with Kenya. A business confederation is warning of the imminent collapse of the Zimbabwean dollar. And the IMF has cut the global growth outlook for 2021. We start in the Horn of Africa, where the International Court of Justice has handed down a long-awaited judgment on a maritime border dispute between Kenya and Somalia. The UN's top court largely ruled in favour of Somalia. For decades, Kenya said that a line due east of where the two countries meet on the coastline, running parallel to the line of latitude, essentially marks their maritime border. Somalia, however, countered that in court. A panel of 14 judges said that Kenya had not proved that Somalia had agreed to its claimed border. The court instead drew a border at the median point between both Somalia's and Kenya's claimed borders. The ICJ, however, has no powers to enforce this ruling, even though from a legal perspective, it's binding on both parties. Last week, Friday, Kenya announced that it had withdrawn its recognition of the court's jurisdiction. All right, then quite a bit of interesting things to come out of this particular case. Let's examine it in a bit more detail. Timothy Walker is the maritime project leader and senior researcher at the Institute of Security Studies. He joins us now live from Johannesburg. What's your assessment of the judgment that came out of the ICJ today?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear that question. Could you just say that again?
What's your assessment of the judgment that came out today?
The fact that the court decided that Kenya would be disproportionately affected by the decision to award a full adjudication of the borderline to Somalia was very interesting. The fact that the distribution of the areas under this court's decision for the new boundary, which would actually leave the ratio would be slightly in favor of Kenya, I think took a few people by surprise. There was a perception, I'd say, that the court's decision was always going to be, given it was very final, would be a very zero-sum, winner-takes-all decision. So the fact that the court has provided potentially, I would say, an opportunity for the two countries to now look at sharing this area as actually quite a positive step.
Had the court agreed with Kenya's position to have that maritime border following a line parallel to lines of latitude, wouldn't that have a trigger effect on other maritime borders that exist south of Kenya? The borders, for example, between Tanzania and Malawi or Mozambique, Tanzania and Mozambique, South Africa, that sort of thing.
It could have that kind of effect, yes, because taking the principle that the maritime boundary is determined by the direction of the land boundary, and given that unfortunately so many of the maritime boundaries in West Africa and in East Africa and in West Africa too are determined maybe by a colonial treaty or a treaty which does not take into account kind of current circumstances, means that countries would have to re-look at their areas and decide whether there is a equitable or an equal share of resources and jurisdiction. Now, there's a lot of practices which occur: fishing, the creation of oil blocks for concession and auction, but those have been determined quite often as well. And there's a lot of activity underway, if it's exploration, if it's sailing, if it's fishing, which can't necessarily be reset again. So this decision may result in some countries looking at redrawing their borders. but I don't see it actually having maybe a domino effect just yet.
Okay, so, and I'm glad you brought up the fisheries question, because that's where I'm heading to next. Because other than fisheries, access to potential gas deposits offshore were a pretty big part of this case. But in an environment where more and more countries are moving away from fossil fuels, isn't the incentive to explore in such frontier areas greatly diminished?
It is, yes. I mean, this dispute in particular was more about the potential of those resources. If the oil price or the gas price would have remained very high, their value would be increased and there'd be a lot of interest or pressure to develop them. Now, with the oil price not being as high as it was in the past, especially when this dispute was brought to the court, and also the fact that the effects of climate change are obviously an absolute requirement to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels and seek alternative ways of generating energy, that their value did decrease as well. But it was always the potential, because, like I say, even auctioning off blocks and for exploration is an important revenue generator, and that's obviously where a lot of the disputes over the last couple of years over this particular boundary has come from. Fisheries, we've mentioned just now as well, very important too, but more so in terms of their management in the future, because there is a very large illegal fishing problem, as I'm sure many of your many viewers are aware. And with increasing populations, especially in coastal areas like Somalia and Kenya, where people are heading to the coast because of the effects of climate change inland, there'll be pressure on those resources as well. And rather than try and determine who controls and simply leave it at that, it does, as I mentioned at the start, create an interesting opportunity for countries to explore how they're going to transcend these issues. And a potential kind of a cooperative agreement was something that could have been sought before the decision had gotten to the court. It was always within the power or the rights of the two countries to have sought some kind of diplomatic solution. The fact that it was escalated, kind of leapfrogging over those diplomatic solutions so quickly, has obviously led to a lot of the rancor and the mistrust, which I think will actually have a long-term impact. That's one of the bigger things to be concerned about, is the fact that if there is an unwillingness to accept or to abide by the court's decisions, that won't necessarily play out at sea in terms of oil blocks or fishing, but it might entail diplomatic problems like we've seen with ambassadors being expelled or recalled, or visas not being granted. The effects actually reverberate throughout the region.
Right. Indeed, and that brings me to my last question, because rulings of the ICJ by design are final, but countries have ignored them in the past. You think of the UK with the Chagos Islands and Mauritius, for example, or the US and Nicaragua back in the 1980s. But now that the court has ruled in Somalia's favor, how do we proceed with enforcement?
I think one of the key things to consider at the moment is Kenya's international role it's playing right now, which actually I think will have maybe an impact in terms of potential pressure from countries to accept the decision or to consider what would be the impact of disregarding it. Kenya obviously being on the Security Council at the moment, having hosted a blue economy, global blue economy conference recently, having basically been credited with the creation of the exclusive zone, which is the right to have these economic resources, which is being contested, and the fact that co-hosting the World Ocean Summit next year, and that the president is part of the high-level ocean panel, means that Kenya has an interest in actually other countries have an interest in seeing that this is the start of cooperation between the two countries, and actually having an impact with others as well. So even if there's no powers of the court to enforce, it does, I think, create almost an obligation on countries to maintain maritime security and good order at sea, that they look at the long-term implications of not abiding by the court's decision.
Indeed. We'll leave it there for the time being. Timothy Walker from the Institute for Security Studies. Thank you. Now, the mobile telecoms operator MTN Uganda has officially opened up its initial public offering, selling about 20% of the company to the public. This comes in the wake of approval from the Capital Markets Authority and the Ugandan Securities Exchange for the IPO. The offer price has been set at about 5 US cents. Here's CGTN's Isabel Nakiria with this report.
Ugandans now have a chance to own a piece of MTN Uganda. The mobile telecom operator has offered to sell 4.5 billion shares. The telecom giant hopes to raise $240 million from the initial public offering.
We wanted to achieve localization through listing. We wanted to make sure that as many as possible Ugandans can get access to applying for a share.
MTN Uganda has 15 million phone subscribers and also offers mobile financial services. The decision to list is in line with the new license requirements by the government, which compel all telecom companies with a national operator's permit to list at least 20% of their shares. MTN says its priority goal now is to drive local ownership of its business across the markets in which the company operates. The company has opened a mobile IPO that will allow buyers to purchase shares using their telephone mobile money accounts.
When using the MIPO platform for applying for MTN Uganda shares, you will get 10 bonus shares for every 100 shares you apply for.
While priority will be given to Uganda, the shares will also be floated to other East African community investors. The IPO is expected to boost the number of retail investors at the Uganda Securities Exchange from about 40,000 to 200,000.
Provides diversification for investors to be able to invest in a new market segment, in a new company and a new sector within the economy.
The IPO is expected to close in 6 weeks. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Now, Nigeria has earned itself the title of Africa's Bitcoin nation. An unstable naira and capital controls have all contributed to the popularity of an alternative asset class, in this case, cryptocurrencies. Nigeria's central bank, however, is not a fan. It's very critical of Bitcoin. In fact, it's gone as far as barring local banks from working with cryptocurrencies as far back in February, warning of severe regulatory sanctions. But Nigerians' appetite for crypto has only gone up. As CGTN's Najma Abdurizak now reports.
Sly Meginda has been producing artwork since 2017. Like a growing number of Nigerian artists, the 27-year-old is selling his pieces on cryptocurrency platforms after COVID-19 lockdowns made traditional exhibitions difficult.
The naira is digressing, and we're trying to keep the value of the art. So cryptocurrency currently is going on the right direction, and the world is jumping on it because we're in a digital world, like I said. So crypto is just something good for the arts to move forward. So that's the currency where people don't think that I'm paying too much or I'm paying less.
Nigerians are turning to crypto for business to protect their savings as the country's fiat currency, the naira, continues to lose value. Nigeria's central bank banned local banks from working with cryptocurrencies in February, warning of severe regulatory sanctions. In August, it also froze the accounts of some crypto users for allegedly sourcing funds from illegal foreign exchange dealers. The move, however, has not stopped Nigeria's appetite for crypto.
I'm just beginning to realize how late I am joining the crypto market, because this is one thing that has already gone far, but I feel it's still not too late. Crypto is the future. Digital currency is the future. Everything is going digitalized now, and I think it's something we really need to roll with.
According to research firm Chain Analysis, in March, just after the central bank ban, the dollar volume of cryptocurrencies sent from Nigeria rose to $132 million, up 17% from the previous month. Transactions in June were above 25%, above the same month last year. Peer-to-peer platform Paxful also experienced a 57% rise in trading volume in Nigeria in the year to June, while user numbers surged 83%. Paxful recently opened an office in Abuja to lobby the government to change its attitude to crypto.
Everything begins with education, and what we're seeing is the Nigerian people are exceptionally hungry and receptive with this education. It's only in Africa when you start talking about cryptocurrency not as a means of investment or speculation, but as a means of exchange, that people get really excited. And what we've seen is the Nigerian youth have built their own businesses offering financial services for their friends and family.
According to data retrieved from Google Trend, Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy in GDP terms, has been adjudged as the only country with a perfect score on interest in Bitcoin. That appetite is expected to even grow further as many Nigerians shift their spending habits to embrace digital currencies. Najma Abdirizak, CGTN.
The UK development finance institution, CDC Group, and Dubai-based operator DP World have signed a partnership agreement worth over $1 billion to invest in Africa's ports. Now, the partnership will support the modernization and expansion of ports and inland logistics across the continent. They're starting, however, with ports of Dakar in Senegal, Sokna in Egypt, and Berbera in Somaliland. By 2035, an estimated $51 billion in additional trade flow is forecast to pass through those 3 ports alone. Nissan's strategy to make its Rosslyn plant in Pretoria the light commercial vehicle hub for its Africa operations is gaining momentum. That's with the assembly of semi-knockdown kits for the new Navara pickup scheduled to commence in Ghana in early 2022. Those kits will be exported from the plant in Rosslyn over to Ghana. Now, Nissan has appointed a long-time partner, Japan Motors Trading Company, to develop the new assembly facility in Accra. The Anglo-Swedish drug maker AstraZeneca says its experimental COVID-19 antibody drug cocktail succeeded in reducing severe disease or death in non-hospitalized patients in a late-stage study. Now, this drug reduced the risk of developing severe COVID-19 or death by at least 50% in patients who had been symptomatic for 7 days or less. AstraZeneca is also developing the drug cocktail as a therapy to protect people who do not have a strong enough immune response to COVID-19 vaccines. And finally, the Samsung heir Jay Lee has pleaded guilty in court to a charge of unlawful use of a controlled substance. Legal woes just seem to continue to haunt the executive, even after his release on parole back in August following a bribery conviction. Lee's release had raised Market Watch's expectations of a flurry of major decisions at the crown jewel of the firm, Samsung Electronics, and its affiliates, including the location of a $17 billion chip factory being planned for in the United States. That's a run through your company headlines. We're nearly 20 minutes into the hour. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. Major businesses are warning of the imminent collapse of the Zimbabwean dollar. And we look at Nigeria's bank's adoption of fintech to spearhead the country's economic recovery.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Central Nigeria. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back to the program. Let's head over to Zimbabwe. The currency over there, the Zimbabwean dollar, is in danger of collapsing as companies are resorting to use the US dollar once again for transactions amidst a government crackdown on parallel market currency trading. Following the arrest of scores of foreign currency traders alleged to be involved in parallel trading of the American dollar over the last few weeks, the government has now threatened, in fact, to go even further, to suspend the operating licenses of any business using parallel market rates in order to price their goods and services. The Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries, the largest representative body for businesses, says it has cautioned the government against criminalizing firms and traders. The value of the domestic currency has weakened to around 88 to the dollar on the official market, compared to 2.5 to the dollar in February 2019. Now, it trades a lot weaker in the parallel market at about 170 to the American dollar. Let's explore how this is actually playing out. Farai Mkutuya joins us now live from Harare with more details on this story. Farai, it's very easy for us to get lost in the numbers around this particular story, but give us a sense of the human side of this crisis. How does this dollar shortage affect SMEs and the ordinary Zimbabwean?
Well, Rama, if you are an individual earning your salary in Zimbabwe dollars, you are faced with a challenge where you are having to pay for most essential services in US dollars. So rentals are in US dollars, school fees is in US dollars, medical bills, consultation fees are in US dollars, and you can't get those US dollars at the official rate. You are having to source them on the parallel market at a rate that is continually moving. A couple of weeks ago on the parallel market, it was about 140 to 1. It's now about 170 to 1, as you mentioned. So it makes life extremely difficult for individuals in terms of being able to be certain, to be able to plan. It erodes their purchasing power and just, makes life extremely difficult. For companies, it's equally as bad. Companies that are allocated foreign currency on the auction market are having to wait weeks and months to get it. And so that causes supply challenges for them because they don't know when they are going to be pay for the raw materials and the inputs that they require. So they're not certain when they can supply their customers. So they could lose market share. They're bleeding revenue. Many of them end up resorting to making a plan, and that plan usually means going onto the parallel market to get the foreign currency at a premium. The alternative is to lose business, to disappoint customers, and to have a very uncertain, business cycle, because you can't plan production, you can't plan supply, you can't plan shifts, amongst others. So that is the reality, the challenge that faces businesses and Zimbabweans here.
Indeed. So the Confederation of Zimbabwe Industries says that this weekly FX auction system needs to go. It needs to be completely overhauled because in some cases, as you pointed out, companies bid for currency today, they're going to get it in December, which is clearly unsustainable. It messes up your cash flow. You can't plan with that. What does the CZI want to be changed here?
Well, Ram, I think it is not just the CZI. I think many business people, the business community, stakeholders in business have been making calls. And I think, many people here feel that the exchange rate, the official exchange rate that is on that auction system is not a true reflection of what this Zim dollar is valued at. Many people feel that it is pegged, that it is managed, that it is kept at that rate by government. And so what businesses, CZI amongst others and many others are saying is, if we insist and persist with this weekly auction, foreign currency auction, then let the rate be allowed to float to this true market value. Let there be a realistic rate, and that will make the system a lot more efficient. We'll see more US dollars being put on there, and it will just make the economy a lot more predictable, because you're dealing with a rate that is predictable, a rate that is market driven, and not a fake rate, because you're using 88 now, but everyone is trading at 170. So that is one overhaul that many people are calling for. But others have said that, look, the Reserve Bank, the central bank, should have less control over this auction, that they should take a step back and allow individual banks to match their own customers who are exporters, who have foreign currency, and match those with importers who require foreign currency, and allow those individual banks to play intermediary and negotiate between those banks to find a mutually acceptable rate, and that will ensure a fairer rate that is paid, but also a more efficient distribution and allocation of foreign currency, which will be good for the economy, Rama.
Indeed. One last question for you. And I know we've discussed this over the years because, Zimbabwe's been struggling with FX shortages. We spoke about bond notes. We were talking about this exact same issue when the country was still using the American dollar. At what point, what would it take for the ruling party to say, OK, we tried this, it didn't work, let's just drop the Zimbabwean dollar, let's re-dollarize again?
Well, Ram, I think that's a very difficult question because, clearly what we've seen so far is that the government, the ruling party is intent on propping up the Zimbabwe dollar. They reintroduced it and they are intent on making sure that it survives and which is why we continue to see, these arrests, these threats, all these efforts that they are trying to maintain its integrity, to restore confidence in it. And so going forward, I think we are likely to see more of this, people being pushed into line, being put into line. More of, more money, more foreign currency being injected into the foreign currency auction where available in order to, sustain it, to keep it going. What may force the government's hand is the market itself. I think the more people shun the local currency and prefer to trade in US dollars, eventually, I think if everyone is trading in US dollars and foreign currency and doesn't want the Zimbabwe dollar, then I think the authorities will be forced to see, to abandon it and see that, it doesn't make sense anymore. But I think at this point in time, the government is going to try all it can to make sure that it props up the Zimbabwe dollar and keeps it afloat and keeps it alive.
Indeed, monetary policy by coercion. Let's see how this plays out. Farai Moktoya live tonight in Harare. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to the world of pharmaceuticals. Rwanda, Senegal or South Africa. Keep those three countries in mind. Any of them could be potential locations for Moderna's planned vaccine factory in Africa. This comes as the American drug maker is stepping up its search for a production site on the continent. Last week, Moderna said it would build a plant in Africa to produce about 500 million doses of vaccines a year, including its COVID-19 shot. Health experts have said that Rwanda, Senegal and South Africa could all be potentially candidates because either they have existing vaccine expertise and production or they have an expressed interest in developing such an industry, or both. Moderna's plans in Africa comes as debate continue to rage between drug makers and governments about waiving intellectual property rights, even for a time-limited period, for COVID-19 vaccines in order to help end the pandemic and give more developing countries access to the shots they need.
We know several countries that already have good healthcare systems and quite a lot of interest in working on this. So we will find partners and as the announcement said last week, we will make the major investment. We expect up to $500 million to be invested by us to set up this facility. Now this facility, it's important to understand, will make many different vaccines because by the time it's up and running, it's not clear what the urgent need for COVID-19 vaccines will be because these things take a few years. But what we're planning to do is to put the plant to make multiple vaccines such that in the future, if there is a pandemic, and there will certainly be, then we can very rapidly convert it to now make the pandemic vaccine and provide vaccine security on the continent. That's the overall goal.
Sudan's government expects the country to return to economic growth this year after decades of decline. The finance ministry over there is forecasting a near 1% rise in GDP for 2021. The government says it expects growth to gradually expand in the years to come if the political situation there remains stable. Napa Mohideen has the details from Khartoum.
Sudan's economy has been mired in a crisis that led to the overthrow of the former leader Omar al-Bashir in 2019 and has continued since. Sudan has for years struggled with an array of economic woes, including a huge budget deficit, widespread shortages and soaring prices for essential goods. Conditions worsened when the oil-rich South seceded in 2011, after decades of war, taking with it more than half of public revenues and 95% of exports. Earlier this year, Sudan paved the way for extensive relief on more than $50 billion in foreign debt by enacting rapid economic reforms, unlocking access to international financing. The Minister of Finance says Sudan's economy has great chances to recover if domestic politics remain stable.
There is a great chance for economy to grow. That will positively impact the situation. If the political turmoil continues, it will revert negatively on the economy. The new investors will stop their business.
Over the next year, the World Bank says it will commit $2 billion in grants to help tackle poverty and inequality and boost growth. Naba Muhiddin, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
Nigeria is banking on the adoption of a lot more fintech to spearhead its economic recovery after the pandemic-induced slump. As CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam now reports, increasing smartphone penetration and a more focused regulatory drive to boost mobile financial transactions is helping to create the perfect recipe for a thriving fintech sector.
For several years, 27-year-old barber Nansel Nanswat was only inclined to cash transactions, from bank withdrawals and deposits to purchases and payments. But all of that changed since the outbreak of COVID-19, with more people now adopting mobile financial transactions.
I use my mobile phone to do almost all my transactions, business and personal. I encourage my customers to pay money into my account because that's easier for me.
Since 2015, there's been more than threefold increase in mobile financial transactions in Nigeria and sub-Saharan Africa. A report by telecommunications giant Ericsson shows that 54% of mobile phone users like Nansel increased their mobile financial transactions in the peak of COVID-19. Besides restrictions caused by the pandemic, the report pointed faster transactions and higher security as reasons for the uptake.
What the BVM did was to add credibility to the services within the financial space. So we now have an almost foolproof identity authentication system.
One of the things that mobile financial services has brought is to reduce movement for people. You don't need to go to the bank. You can stay at the confinement and the convenience of your house with your device and pay fees.
Data from Nigeria's telecommunications regulator shows that there are close to 200 million active mobile phone users in the country. 122 million of them are connected to the internet, creating a perfect recipe for a thriving fintech sector.
More investment into our financial tech services. This will actually open the door and more like a gateway for young entrepreneurs, for even the unemployed Nigerian youth to focus their mindset towards creating businesses and offering financial services that are focused towards the financial technology market.
Many people in rural communities are also becoming aware of mobile financial services, and where the internet fails, alternatives like the USSD codes have become a viable option. Experts believe that ultimately, the use of mobile technology will continue to help combat the impact of the pandemic, fuel economic development, and accelerate financial inclusion across Africa. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
We're still in the payment space, but this time in Egypt. The central bank of there has announced that it's approved the issuance of licenses for smartphone contactless payments. The central bank says that the decision was made based on the strategy put forth by Egypt's National Consular Payments, which aims to drastically reduce the use of physical cash. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the details.
Karim Mustafa owns a small restaurant in Egypt's capital, Cairo. He receives payments in cash or credit cards, but he says contactless payments using an application on the smartphone to pay bills would be a favorable addition.
It's a good idea because since the outbreak of coronavirus, people are trying to avoid contracting the virus and therefore are worried about using cash or cards. To have a wireless payment on the mobile is more safe and secure and could bring more business.
The Central Bank of Egypt has introduced contactless payment as part of its long-term strategy for financial inclusion and to transform into a cashless economy.
CBE wants to speed up the digital transformation, making it easier for small merchants, for traders. The mobile app will make it easier. Visa payments require points of sale and infrastructure that is a burden for small merchants. For individuals, it avoids queues to pay any bill, even at supermarkets. The process is easier and faster.
But experts say there should be steps taken to incorporate the infrastructure that will help this payment system to take off.
We have to work on different phases at the same time. We have to build the infrastructure. The CBE is working with banks to do so. In the United States, contactless payment, which we are still launching here, has increased by 150% since 2019. This proves that this is the global trend, which means financial inclusion and a cashless economy.
The technology is a welcome transformation for Karim and the staff in his restaurant.
I think that technology has become widespread, and I would download the application for contactless payment if it proves to be fast and easy to use.
But for most small merchants and users, they say authorities will need to lead a strong digital awareness campaign to teach and encourage them to download the app before it can become a widespread payment system. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up. The IMF cuts the global growth outlook for 2021. We'll look at the latest numbers. And the UK's government steps in to protect heavy industry, grappling with a steep rise in energy prices.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the program. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour. The International Court of Justice has handed down its long-awaited judgment in the maritime border row between Kenya and Somalia. The United Nations top court largely ruled in Somalia's favor. Now, for decades, Kenya said that a line due east, running parallel to the line of latitude where the two countries meet on the coastline, is essentially where the maritime border should be. Somalia disputed that in court, and the court largely agreed with them. A panel of 14 judges said that Kenya had not proved that Somalia had agreed to its claimed border. Elsewhere, the trial of a former Central African Republic militia commander, Mohamed Said, continues. He was a faction commander for the Seleka rebels. ICC prosecutor Karim Khan alleges that Said took part in beating and mistreating prisoners. The prosecution is alleging that Said ran 2 detention centers at the time of the crimes. The prisoners were accused of supporting the ousted president, Francois Bozize. Libya's Joint Military Commission has backed a plan to evacuate foreign fighters and mercenaries from the country. The United Nations support mission in Libya has described the step as historic. On Monday, 5 Western countries also welcomed the move. Representatives of rival military forces have agreed on a balanced withdrawal process for these fighters. And finally, Zimbabwe's currency is in danger of collapsing as companies resort increasingly to using the US dollar for transactions amid a crackdown on black market currency trading. Following the arrest of scores of foreign currency traders alleged to be involved in parallel trading of the currency over the last few weeks, the government is now going further. It's threatening to suspend the licenses of businesses using parallel market trade in order to price their goods and services. That's a run through your headlines. The International Monetary Fund says it is a lot less optimistic about the global economy for 2021, but it still sees a reasonable growth coming in over the medium term. In its latest edition of the World Economic Outlook, the fund says it expects global GDP to grow by 5.9% this year. That's 0.1 percentage point lower than its estimate back in July. For next year, the IMF has kept its global growth projection essentially unchanged, 4.9%. The revised outlook for this year comes amid supply chain issues in advanced economies and a worsening health situation in emerging economies too. The US is one of the countries in this position. The IMF has cut its growth estimates for the country this year by 1 percentage point down to 6%. The growth outlooks for Spain and Germany were also trimmed by 0.5 percentage points each. China's outlook was trimmed by 0.1 percentage point down to just 8%. In the meantime, the IMF World Bank annual meetings have kicked off, and they started off with a virtual session on the damage that COVID-19 has done to the jobs and incomes of working women and mothers. Opening remarks were given by the IMF's Managing Director, Kristalina Georgieva. Caroline Malone has this report from Washington.
Leading the discussion today is our fabulous Sabina Bhatia.
The COVID-19 pandemic has affected most people globally, but working women and mothers have been especially hard hit, with jobs and incomes lost, according to an opening session at the IMF. Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva says it's clear that while many economies make significant progress when women are allowed to fully participate in the workforce, that progress has been reversed recently.
It is clear that the pandemic has robbed mothers of their hard-won financial progress. And sadly, this is affecting women everywhere in all regions. One IMF study focuses on sub-Saharan Africa. It demonstrates that when women lose income, this also spills over onto their children, harming future generations.
The IMF says 54 million women dropped out of the workforce globally during the pandemic. In the US, that's especially true of those in lower income jobs in industries that weren't so-called pandemic-proof. Reshma Saujani is the founder of a non-profit organization that promotes and supports women and girls learning code, aiming to help make sure females are better represented in the tech sector.
Women have gotten crushed in the pandemic, not just here in the United States, but globally. And the reason why women were literally pushed out of the labor force is, one, many women, especially low-income women, found themselves in jobs that weren't pandemic-proof, like retail, healthcare, and education. And when the pandemic hit, they lost their jobs. The second thing is that many women, because our care structure is broken, and because schools were shut down, many women had to supplement essentially their paid labor for unpaid labor.
Saujani is calling for a plan that puts women at the forefront of all economic recovery from the global pandemic, with consideration on better sick leave and affordable childcare. The IMF session is calling for a better, fairer and more equitable workplace for women, especially post-pandemic. But all the while, the head of the IMF is under scrutiny for alleged data tampering while at the World Bank, which is threatening to hurt the reputations of both international institutions. An independent report found that Georgieva pressured staff to change information on the World Bank's Doing Business Index of 2018 to be more favourable to China. She's denied the allegations, but her position at the head of the IMF is tenuous, as the executive board considers whether she'll lose her role, even while she takes centre stage as the IMF's annual meetings continue. Caroline Malone, CGTN, Washington.
The UK government is finally stepping in to help protect heavy industry that is grappling with soaring gas prices. Andrew Wilson has more on the country's growing energy crisis.
Senior executives from the UK's biggest industrial sectors like steel, ceramics and glass are starting to publicly predict serious outcomes if the government doesn't engage with their appeals for help in the face of the energy crisis. They say it absolutely has to help with hugely inflated costs, or there'll be job losses and factory shutdowns across the board.
If government does nothing, we would start to see job losses in the steel sector. We need action now, not in the next months and few months or up till Christmas, because if we don't see action now, then we will, as a steel sector, not have a Christmas to look forward to.
Meetings are likely to take place all week, with junior ministers gathering as much information as they can about the seriousness of the situation to feed back to Downing Street. However, at this early stage, the Treasury is showing no sign of reaching for extra funding, and that's leading to speculation about the Chancellor's strategy or even indecision in the Prime Minister's office. The Business Secretary is front and centre, and it seems pretty much on his own so far.
I think it's a critical situation. Clearly, I'm speaking to industry, as you've said, all the time, and high gas prices, they've quadrupled this year, are making an impact. And that's why I'm, as you say, speaking to people, listening and trying to work out a way forward.
It's a global issue caused by post-pandemic recovery, the shift away from fossil fuels and supply chain issues everywhere with natural gas. Business Minister Kwesi Kwarteng has now submitted what he's calling a formal bid to the Finance Ministry for assistance to help industries, a sign at least that the government is perhaps starting to react to the situation. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
Flea markets have been popping up across Afghanistan. People are selling their belongings to either leave the country or just to buy food. Abdul Hadi Dariz has the story from Kabul.
When Taliban came to power, a countless number of Afghans rushed to flea markets to sell their belongings and leave the country. Najibullah Hassani, a resident of Kabul, was one of them.
I sold all my household items to leave the country, but I returned halfway along the way. I've cancelled my plans for going to Pakistan because the situation seems to have improved a bit. But I witnessed many people selling their property to flee the country when evacuations were underway.
When the Taliban entered Kabul, most people thought their life would be at risk, so they did whatever they could to get out of the city. Many sold their priceless belongings at rock-bottom prices.
I sold my belongings for 1/5 of the price. Many people did that.
People sold all of their belongings. On the very first days, people sold their household items for 1/4 or 1/5 of the price to flee the country.
Apart from those fleeing the country, most people are still selling things to put food on the table as poverty and unemployment have increased tremendously.
Women bring us 2 or 3 bowls or plates to sell so that they can buy a few loaves of bread for their children.
There are no employment opportunities, so our poor and impoverished people are selling whatever they have to feed their families.
The economic situation in Afghanistan is worsening by the day, and the UN says almost all Afghans will live under the poverty line by the middle of next year if no action is taken. Now the question for many here is what the Taliban are planning to do to avert that crisis. Abdul Hadi Dariz, CGTN, Kabul.
The ongoing Shanghai Fashion Week is focusing on sustainable fabrics. Now, going green is not a new concept in the fashion industry, but can eco-friendly fabrics actually make a difference that designers are hoping for? Chen Tong visited a trade show of the Fashion Week to find out.
Zhou Hao brought his recycled fabrics back to Fashion Week once again this season. Since their last showcase at a trade show in April, he's found some 10 independent designers looking for green fabrics. Business is booming.
More independent designers are designing special collections based on recycled materials. So this is a trend that is gradually growing.
Shanghai Fashion Week is going green once again, but this season, how have these sustainable fabrics been doing in the China market is the key question. Sportswear brand Adidas has also pioneered the use of green fabrics. So far, 60% of the company's fabrics are considered green, where its goal is to make it to 90% by 2025. The company says consumers still prioritize designs over where fabrics come from. But more people are shopping not just for what looks good, but what's best for the planet.
Obviously, we see this as an educational process and a progression. It will not happen overnight, but over the last 5 years, we observe rising awareness, more active participation, joining us on this journey.
Recycled bottles and second-hand clothing have become great sources for sustainable fabrics. Large fashion brands have already begun efforts to greenify their production lines. It seems too good to be true, but industry insiders say it's not enough.
就以我在这个工业口的利用做得非常的
The way second-hand clothing is recycled has been a headache. 95% of the industrial waste has been used well because we have rules and principles to do that. But second-hand clothing are in the hands of ordinary people because there are many procedures to turn second-hand clothing into industrial use. Logistics are difficult and the carbon emissions are also high.
A report from China National Textile and Apparel Council shows 200 million tons of waste fabrics are produced in China every year, but only less than 10% of them are recycled. If the recycle rate can reach 60%, that could save 188 million tons of crude oil every year. Chen Tong, CGTN, Shanghai.
All right, then a quick update on commodity prices. This time we're focusing on the agriculture side of things. Coffee prices surging close to a 7-year high today, up nearly 5% as a mix of supply side and logistics issues continue to plague coffee. Brazil, of course, is the largest producer of that commodity. Fields over there, though, have seen some pretty adverse growing conditions with repeated frost and drought affecting plant yields. Now let's move on to Nigeria. Many farmers over there do suffer post-harvest losses, in part due to logistical challenges. And that in turn adversely affects the level of food production within the country. It's even more challenging for palm oil farmers who use painstaking and time-consuming traditional methods in the vegetable oil processing chain. A Nigerian startup, though, Relief, is now trying to help these farmers address some of these challenges through the use of hardware and software solutions. CGTN's Deji Badimosi has more on that story on Grassroots.
Farmers in Nigeria often use rocks and other crude hardware to crack palm nuts to get the kernels. And most times, what they get is low-quality kernel, largely unfit for high-quality vegetable oil manufacturing. And without enough high-quality palm kernel from the farmers, most factories like this one, where palm kernel oil is processed into vegetable oil, are starved of their primary raw materials and operate below capacity. Helping local farmers to get over the rigors of the time-consuming traditional method of cracking palm nuts to get the kernels, as well as increase the production of vegetable oil from palm kernel, is what the agrotech startup Relief literally does.
Relief's mission is to decentralize food processing in Africa. So our belief is that the food processing industry in Africa needs to adapt to today's realities and better support smallholder farmers in climbing the ladder towards prosperity. So we operate a network of smart factories with proprietary processing equipment that we've developed ourselves. And we use these factories to buy raw materials from smallholder farmers, process them, and then sell inputs to consumer brands that you would use or find in your supermarket.
Relief also provides capital funds and loans to smallholder farmers in exchange for the palm nuts.
So when we enter a community, we finance the ladies first. So generally, we'll finance 100% female beneficiaries for the first couple months of working in a community. The thought process there is that oftentimes the women in communities are more willing to try out financing schemes and fulfill their side of the bargain. And as other members of the community see that the financing scheme creates a win-win solution and that the farmer makes more money and Relief makes more money, then we democratize access to the financing.
The startup has also begun siting its factories close to the farmers for better access and quick turnaround.
We select factories where we can work very close with smallholder farmers within 50 kilometers of that factory. We then go out and make outreach to the farmers, explain to them how our business works and the value that we can provide them. And then we buy their raw materials, process them, and sell the finished goods.
Despite having an edge in the quality of production, Relief has kept its product affordable, Since it began operation some 6 years ago, it now services over 2,000 smallholder farmers.
Nigeria's population grows at about 3% per annum. We'll be the third most populous country by 2050. And so we need to start helping smallholders focus on food production rather than having them involved in every step of the value chain, from cracking nuts with rocks to finding traders to transport their stuff to, etc. The food factories in the country need to do a better job of helping smallholders focus on farming, and that's what Relief's role is.
The startup has just concluded a $4.2 million seed round funding, with plans to expand its operations and sign up more smallholder farmers. Nigeria spends around $500 million annually on oil palm imports. The sector has 60% more demand than it produces. Relief is contributing its own quota in bridging that gap. DG Bademasi, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Still on the matter of food, but this story is from Tunisia. If you're a chili enthusiast, you're going to enjoy this. Tunisia is hosting the harissa festival. Harissa is a Tunisian hot chili paste made in a traditional way, and it's used in pretty much most of the recipes in the North African country. It's well known for its health benefits and natural ingredients. But this report, here's CGTN's Adin Chouachi.
Latifa Khalil is a renowned traditional harissa maker in the Cap Bon Peninsula in northeastern Tunisia. She learned this skill of harissa making from her grandmother. Latifa's community has always lived from the land produce and the hot chili pepper paste.
The hot chili pepper is the most important vegetable in this region. All the families in our coastal region earn a living by making and selling harissa. This hot chili pepper paste is our life. It's organic, healthy and tasty. There's no marriage or family celebration without harissa.
The homemade harissa recipe is passed down from one generation to the next. Muna is a tradeswoman who's taught her daughter how to make, promote and sell harissa.
The easiest way is to rehydrate the red chilies in hot water, then remove the stems and seeds. Mix your cumin and coriander seeds and grind in a mortar and pestle. Next, you'll add smoked paprika, salt and garlic and mix again into a paste. Add olive oil near the end to create a creamy sauce. You can eat and enjoy it with bread or add it in any recipe.
The traditional harissa is often added to lablebi. It's Tunisia's most famous street food and recipe. This chickpea soup is a seasoned cooking liquid. It is served over small pieces of stale, crusty bread. Many visitors came from neighboring cities to taste Hassan's food.
My specialty is the lablabi with harissa. This delicious hot chili pepper paste is a source of inspiration in Tunisian cuisine. It brings more flavor to any food.
Harissa is celebrated every day in Tunisia. The festival continues at home throughout Tunisia.
Due to COVID-19 restrictions and lockdowns, the Harissa festival was postponed several times over the last 2 years. The annual event is a special occasion to celebrate Tunisia's traditional culinary culture.
The region of Nebel is known as the capital of spices in the North African country. This sector employs more than 5,000 people, especially women, who make and sell harissa. The Harissa Festival is a cultural event that aims to spread the culture of healthy, homemade food in Tunisia. Adin Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Quick run through the currencies. So the Naira hit 413.86 today, fairly weak in the formal market. That comes barely 24 hours after the country's VP argued that the central bank's current demand management approach, which includes some pretty nasty capital controls, needs a rethink. Under the current governor, Godwin Emefiele, the CBN has been cracking down, even just on providing information on dollar Naira rates in the parallel market, as we saw when the CBN announced a probe into the popular platform for that, Aboki FX. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. Many ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.